Welcome to His Eternal Diary. I was reading through this script last night, and the detail that stayed with me wasn't the betrayal. It was the moment he realized the waiting wasn't a break in the relationship. It was the relationship. A quiet decision made in a parking structure in December. That's where this one turns. Let's get into it.
The air in the parking garage smelled like damp concrete and engine oil, and the cold had gotten into everything. The car door handle, the seams of my jacket, the back of my throat when I breathed too deep. I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. Isolde's text was on the screen. I think I'm ready to stop waiting too. Can we talk? I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and looked at the column of cement in front of me, which had a crack running through it from the base up to somewhere above the height of the car, where it disappeared into shadow. The crack looked old. No one had fixed it. I didn't respond to the text. Not yet. What I did was sit in the quiet and let myself go back to the beginning of it, because by the time you get to December, but you forget that there was ever a version of yourself who didn't know what he was dealing with. You forget you once believed the word wait meant something temporary. Isolde had asked me to wait in October. 2 months ago. 2 months and 4 days, to be exact, though I hadn't been counting the way people count when they're holding on to hope. I'd been counting the way you count when you're reading the terms of a contract and want to know exactly how long the clause is active. I should go back further than October. I should go back to where it actually started, because that's the only way any of this makes sense. I met Isolde Vane at a fundraiser hosted by Thornfield Legal Alliance on a Tuesday evening in March, 3 years before December. The event was at a hotel in the financial district. One of those rooms with 30-foot ceilings and not enough chairs, so people stood in clusters and moved slowly and tried to look like they were there for the cause rather than the contacts. I was there representing Ashevale Capital, where I'd been working as a senior portfolio analyst for 4 years. My director at the time, a compact, hard-eyed man named Percival, had told me to attend and make the firm visible. So I attended and made the firm visible. Isolde was standing near the drinks table with a glass of sparkling water, talking to a woman I didn't recognize and laughing at something just before I reached the table. I noticed her because the laugh was real, not the polished, controlled sound people make at events like that one. It was actual amusement, was the kind that starts low and rises without permission. I poured myself a water and stood near enough to not interrupt. She noticed me noticing and ended the conversation cleanly. Then she turned to me with a directness that most people reserve for people they already know. "You look like you're running a calculation," she said. "Always," I said. Her name was Isolde Vane. She was an associate at a litigation firm that shared a building with Thornfield's offices. She was precise, ambitious, and occasionally funny in a way that caught you sideways. We talked for 40 minutes at that fundraiser and exchanged cards. I texted her 3 days later. She responded in under an hour. What followed was a year of something that I can only describe as careful. I was careful. I didn't rush anything because I had learned by the age of 32 that the things you rush toward are rarely what they looked like from a distance. We built a structure to us, routines, inside jokes, the specific rhythm of how we disagreed and came back together. She was good at her job, and I respected that. I was steady, and she seemed to appreciate it. By the second year, we had talked, in general terms, about the future. A shared place, eventually. Maybe a year from then. The conversation was easy and forward-looking, and I remember thinking, This is what it looks like when two adults build something without making a mess of it. I was wrong about that. But I wouldn't know I was wrong for another 12 months. The joint account was Isolde's idea. She brought it up in February of that third year, 8 months before October, and framed it as practical. We were splitting bills on a shared streaming service, subscriptions, dinners, the occasional weekend trip. It made more sense to pool a small amount each month into a joint account rather than running a ledger between us. It was sensible. I agreed. We each contributed monthly. I contributed more, my income was higher. By the time October arrived, the account held $45,000, approximately $30,000 from me, $15,000 from her, a calculation I had verified against the wire transfer records in my banking history. I mention this not to be petty about money, but because in the months that followed, money would be the only language in which I could speak clearly and be entirely understood. Went in September, a month before she asked me to wait. I had been pre-approved for a mortgage on a 2-bedroom apartment in the Fenwick district. The pre-approval was in my name, my income, my credit score, my assets. Isolde and I had viewed 4 properties together. She had liked one particularly, a ground-floor unit with a south-facing kitchen and built-in bookshelves in the living room. I had been prepared to make an offer. I had also, in a gesture that I now recognize as premature, updated the beneficiary on my life insurance policy in August. $380,000. I had listed Isolde as primary beneficiary. These are the things I had done to build toward a shared future. In October, on a Sunday evening, Isolde sat across from me at the kitchen table of her apartment, with her hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from, and she said, "I need some time to figure things out. I'm not saying it's over. I just need space to understand what I want." The kitchen smelled like garlic from dinner that had burned slightly at the edges. The overhead light was too harsh. I had been reaching for the salt when she started talking, and I set it down and listened without interrupting. "What things?" I asked. She said she felt overwhelmed. She said she wasn't sure she was ready for the step we were about to take, the apartment, the formalization of everything. She said it wasn't about me, which is the thing people say when it's precisely about you, but they want to avoid saying so. I asked if there was someone else, but she looked at me steadily and said no. I believed her. I shouldn't have, not completely. But I believed her enough to accept the explanation she was offering, which was, she needed time. A pause, not an ending. "How long?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. "A few weeks, maybe more." I nodded. I told her I understood. I drove home and sat in my apartment and felt the particular heaviness of someone who has been handed a task with no clear completion criteria. Wait. For what, exactly? Until she decided. Until she felt ready. Until she had figured out whatever it was she needed to figure out, with no timeline and no deliverable. I was 34 years old, and I agreed to wait. The first 2 weeks were mostly discipline. I went to work. I ran in the morning, 5 miles, or a route that took me past the Fenwick district and the building where we'd looked at properties. I didn't look at the building more than once. I called my mother on Sundays. I did not contact Isolde except for 2 brief texts. One to check she was okay, one to confirm a piece of mail of mine had arrived at her apartment by mistake. Both received polite, brief responses. I told myself this was reasonable. A relationship could withstand a pause if the foundation was solid. She had said it wasn't over. I had accepted that, but I have always been someone who notices details. I learned to do this at Ashvale, where your entire professional existence depends on reading information correctly, identifying what's been left out of a presentation, understanding that the number you're not being shown is often more important than the one you are. And I bring that habit home with me. I can't set it down at the office door. In the third week, I noticed that Isolde was not withdrawn from the world. She was not, as the phrase figuring things out might imply, spending her evenings alone with her uncertainty. She was going to dinner. She was attending events. I knew this not because I was tracking her, I wasn't, but because she had not adjusted her social media settings, and I was still able to see what she was tagged in. A photo appeared at a restaurant in the Herondale district. Isolde with 3 people I didn't recognize, at a table of 6. It was a Thursday night. The restaurant was one of those places with a 6-week wait for reservations. The person sitting beside her, leaning in slightly toward her wine glass, was a man I didn't know. Dark hair, broad shoulders. That's a jacket that fit in a way that suggests someone who pays attention to things like that. The photo was candid, not posed. Someone had taken it mid-conversation, and he was laughing at something Isolde was saying, and she was looking at him with an expression I recognized. I closed the app. I didn't look again. I filed it. Here is a thing that is true about how I process information. I don't react to a single data point. One anomalous number in a spreadsheet doesn't mean the model is broken. You need a pattern. You wait for the pattern. The pattern arrived in the 4th week. I was leaving a client meeting at the Ashvale offices. We were on the 7th floor of a building 2 blocks from Thornfield's tower. And I took the parking structure exit on the south side because it was faster. I was on level 2, walking toward my car, keys already in my hand. They were at the elevator. Isolde and the man from the photo. He had his hand on the small of her back, the particular placement that is not a friendly gesture. She was laughing at something, her head slightly tilted. She saw me first. The laugh didn't stop immediately. It faded, like audio being slowly turned down. "Callum," she said. "Isolde," I said. The man, who I would later learn was named Dominic Raphael, a managing partner at a private equity firm with offices on the 9th floor of the Thornfield building, looked between us with the particular composure of someone who has been in this situation before. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. The elevator opened. Neither of them moved toward it. I kept walking to my car. I didn't look back. I sat in the driver's seat for 4 minutes without starting the engine. Not because I was gathering myself. I was gathering information, running the calculation. She had told me 6 weeks ago that she needed time to figure things out. What I had seen in that parking structure was someone who had already figured them out. She hadn't been in a period of uncertainty. She had been in a period of transition. And the transition was from me to someone else, and the word wait had been the language she used to buy herself time to make that transition without having to say it directly. I started the car. I drove to the pharmacy to pick up a prescription I'd forgotten. I made dinner when I got home. I did not call her, text her, or send a single message. What I did do, at 10 o'clock that night, sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen, was make a list. The list was not emotional, but it was practical. I wrote down every financial and legal connection between Isolde and me that I could identify. Joint savings account. Approximately $45,000. My contributions documentable through wire records, $30,000. Life insurance policy, $380,000. Primary beneficiary, Isolde Vane, filed in August. Co-signer on her vehicle loan. I had agreed to this in January, when her credit score had a gap from a period between jobs. The loan was $22,000, paid down to $14,000 now. My name was legally attached. Mortgage pre-approval, in my name exclusively, but she had been part of the property search. No contracts signed. No shared legal exposure there. Ashevale retirement and investment accounts, entirely in my name. No joint designation, no beneficiary issue. Safe. Was an $80,000 transfer I had been planning to make into the joint account as a down payment contribution, not yet executed. I underlined that last one. I sat back and looked at the list for a long time. Then I called Gideon. Gideon Aldous and I had been friends since university. He'd been the only person in our circle who could read a contract for pleasure. He went on to become an estate and financial attorney with a small practice in the Caldwell district. He was the person I called when I needed to understand exactly what a legal document said, not what it implied. He answered on the second ring. "It's late," he said. "I know. I need an appointment." A pause. Gideon could read a voice the way I could read a balance sheet. "When?" he said. "Tomorrow. End of day if you have it." "I have it," he said. Come at 5. Gideon's office was on the 3rd floor of a brownstone in Caldwell that he shared with 2 other attorneys and a notary. The building smelled like old paper and the particular staleness of spaces where difficult conversations have been happening for decades. I sat across from his desk with the legal pad and walked him through everything. He listened without interrupting, which is the right way to listen. When I finished, he picked up the pad and read it back silently, nodding occasionally. "The joint account," he said. "Do you have documentation of your contributions?" "Wire records. Each transfer is time-stamped and sourced from my personal checking account." "Good. That makes it straightforward. In your state, as a joint account means joint access. You can withdraw your documented contributions without requiring her signature or consent, and without legal exposure, as long as you can show the source." "I know. I wanted to confirm. The life insurance is easy. Beneficiary changes are unilateral. You don't notify the current beneficiary. You submit the change to the insurer, they update the file, done. It takes 48 hours. Who do I name instead? Your mother, a trust, whoever you want, but change it before she files any kind of domestic partner claim, which she can't actually do if you were never cohabiting formally." He checked the pad again. "You maintained separate residences." "Always. We talked about moving in together, but we hadn't." "Good. A no common law marriage claim applies in your state with separate residences and no formal cohabitation. She has no legal standing to any of your independent accounts, retirement funds, or the property purchase that never went through." "The car loan," I said. Gideon leaned back. The leather of his chair made a small sound. "That's the one that needs active attention. You're on the hook for that loan if she defaults. I'd send a certified letter to the lender, I can draft it, requesting removal as cosigner. She'll need to refinance independently, but given her income at the litigation firm, she should qualify without you." "She will," I said. "I was never necessary for that loan. She asked, and I agreed because we were building something." "Right," Gideon said. He didn't add anything to that. And I told him about the $80,000 I had not yet transferred. He said, "Don't transfer it." I wasn't going to. "Write that down somewhere with a date on it. Even just a note to yourself, time-stamped. If she ever tries to claim you made representations about that money, you want a record showing when the decision was made." I wrote it on the legal pad, right there in his office. He notarized the page. We talked for another 40 minutes about the structure of my investment portfolio. Gideon had been suggesting for 2 years that I move a portion of my liquid assets into a revocable living trust, not primarily for tax reasons, but for clarity of ownership and the kind of long-term protection that becomes relevant in partnership situations. I told him I was ready to move on that. But he pulled out the formation documents I'd declined twice before, and we started going through them. The trust was structured as a straightforward, revocable living trust with me as the sole grantor and trustee. My mother as contingent trustee, named in the event of my incapacity. My assets would be titled in the name of the trust rather than in my personal name. A distinction that matters in ways most people never need to understand until they do. We set a timeline. Have the trust operational within 2 weeks. I drove home that night with the specific quiet of someone who has converted worry into a task list. The anxiety doesn't disappear. It becomes something actionable. The next morning, at 7:45, I walked into my branch bank before the morning rush and spoke to the relationship manager. I had an appointment. As I had brought the wire transfer documentation, 6 pages of time-stamped records showing each of my contributions to the joint account. The total in my name: $29,840. I withdrew $29,840. The remaining $15,160, all traceable to Isolde's transfers, I left untouched. Not generosity. Precision. I wasn't taking what wasn't mine. I was taking what was. The relationship manager looked at the screen and then at me and said, "Are you sure about this?" "Yes," I said. She processed it. The money moved into my individual account before 9 in the morning. I went to work. I sat at my desk at Ashevale and ran a sector performance analysis for a client in the industrial segment, and I did it cleanly and well, and nobody in the office would have known that morning from any other morning. Elena, my colleague 2 desks to the left, brought me a coffee at 10:30. She set it on the edge of my desk without saying anything. Elena was like that. She read a room and acted accordingly. We had worked alongside each other for 3 years. She was methodical and politically aware, and rarely wrong about people. "You look like you're doing math in your head instead of on the screen," she said. "I'm always doing math in my head." "Different math today." I looked at her. She wasn't prying. She was observing, which is different. "Something personal," I said. "I'm handling it." She nodded, took her own coffee back to her desk. At noon, she appeared again. "Something I should probably tell you," she said. "So last week, while you were in the Westmere client review, someone called the main line asking for you, specifically for your direct extension. I happened to pick up because Jasmine was at lunch." "Who was it?" "She didn't give a name, but she asked if you'd been in the office this week and whether you'd had any meetings with outside parties." I looked at Elena. I told her that we don't share information about employees' schedules with outside callers, Elena said. Then I asked who was calling. She hung up. What did the voice sound like? "Controlled," Elena said, like someone who was trying to sound casual. I thanked her. I knew it was Isolde. Not because of any evidence I could point to directly, but because the question, whether I'd had meetings with outside parties, was specific in a way that made sense given what she might be trying to determine. She wanted to know if I'd consulted anyone. A lawyer, perhaps. A financial advisor. She was reading the room, the same as I was, which meant she was also running a calculation. The problem with her calculation was that she was running it too late. Over the following 8 days, I completed the following. I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance policy from Isolde Vane to my mother, Patricia Aldous. The insurer processed the change within 48 hours and sent confirmation to my email. I submitted the cosigner removal request, drafted by Gideon, sent via certified mail with return receipt, to the auto lender. And the lender would contact Isolde about whether her independent income qualified for a refinance. It was her problem to solve, not mine, and I had flagged it in writing, which is all the law required of me. I canceled the mortgage pre-approval I had obtained through Hargrove Lending. A pre-approval is not a contract. Canceling it is a phone call and a brief email. Done. I opened a new personal investment account at a separate institution from my primary bank, a custodial account in my name alone, with beneficiary designation to the trust Gideon had formed. I began moving my liquid investment assets there over the following weeks, in increments that were clean and legal and required no explanation to anyone. The trust became operational. My investment portfolio, the accumulated result of a decade of careful saving and reinvestment, which had reached just over $400,000, was retitled in the name of the Revocable Living Trust. My name on paper was now one step removed from the assets themselves. I removed Isolde from every emergency contact form I could locate: my primary care physician, my employer's HR file, my dental office, the contact list with my building's front desk. I did all of this without contacting her, without signaling anything, without giving any indication that the quiet she believed she had engineered was in fact the time I had used to build a structure she would not be able to reach. People who ask you to wait assume that while you're waiting, you are stationary, that you are held in a kind of suspended state, thinking about them, hoping they'll return, doing nothing that changes the geometry of the situation. As Isolde did not know me well enough, or she had known me and had chosen not to think about what I was capable of when I had a task and a deadline. The text arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the parking structure. I think I'm ready to stop waiting too. Can we talk? I was in the parking garage at Ashvale when I read it. The same concrete column with the crack running up from the floor. I read the message twice, set the phone down, looked at the column. She'd said too. I'm ready to stop waiting too. As if she had also been waiting. As if we had both been paused in the same holding pattern, equal participants in a shared suspension. The language was careful in the way that false language is careful. She had chosen a construction that made us symmetrical. Two people who had been at a standstill, both now ready to move. But it was designed to set the conversation up as a mutual return rather than her seeking re-entry into something she had vacated. I thought about the precision of the word "to" for a moment. Then I started the car and drove home and showered and made dinner and did not respond until 9 o'clock, when I sent a single text. Thursday, 7 p.m. My place. She responded within 2 minutes. Okay, I had chosen Thursday because I needed 2 more days. Not for emotional preparation. I had a phone call with Gideon scheduled for Wednesday afternoon to confirm that everything was in place. I wanted to walk into that conversation with nothing loose. Wednesday's call lasted 20 minutes. Gideon confirmed. Trust operational, beneficiary changes recorded, cosigner removal submitted and acknowledged by the lender, joint account cleared of my contributions. And he said, "You're clean. Whatever she says on Thursday, you have no exposure." I told him I understood. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready since I made the list," I said. There was a pause on the line. "Let me know how it goes," he said. It wasn't a professional statement. It was what a friend says when they know you're walking into something that will require more from you than preparation. Thursday at 7, Isolde knocked at my door. I had made tea, 2 cups, because that's what you do when someone comes to your home. You offer them something. But I had thought carefully about where we would sit. Not on the sofa, where we had always sat together. At the kitchen table, where the chairs face each other directly and there is nothing to lean into. She came in with the particular energy of someone who has rehearsed their entrance, coat off cleanly, a small exhale as she sat down, her hands wrapping around the cup the same way they had wrapped around the mug the night she asked me to wait. I wondered if she knew she did that, the hands around the cup thing, and whether it was conscious or just what her body did when it needed to appear settled. She looked at me. I looked at her. "How are you?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "You?" "I've been thinking," she said. "I imagined you had." A small pause. She had expected me to ask what she'd been thinking about, or to say something that opened a space. I didn't. She continued. She had made a mistake, she said. She had been going through something. She called it a period of uncertainty, and which is a phrase that places the experience in the self rather than in the choices. And she had not handled it well. She had allowed something to happen that should not have happened. She missed what we had. She wanted to try again. She said it clearly, in complete sentences, with controlled emotion. No tears. Isolde was not a person who used tears instrumentally. It was one of the things I had originally respected about her. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, she looked at me the way someone looks when they have placed something on the table and are waiting to see how the other person picks it up. "I know about Dominic Raphael," I said. She didn't flinch, but something in her face settled differently. "I saw you in the parking structure 3 weeks ago," I said. "I've known since then. Probably suspected it before that, if I'm being honest with myself." She said, "I should have told you." "Yes. I was scared of how you'd react." "I know," I said. And then, because it was true, "This is my reaction." She reached across the table. I looked at her hand, not as a gesture of rejection. I simply looked at it, the way you look at something you're reading carefully. "Isolde," I said, "I'm not angry. I want you to know that. I'm not going to have an argument with you. I'm not going to tell you what I think of what you did because it wouldn't change anything, and it would give both of us an emotion to hide behind." She withdrew her hand slowly. "But I'm also not waiting anymore." She looked at me steadily. "The joint account," I said. "I've withdrawn my contributions, everything that came from my transfers, with documentation. On your 15,000 is still there, untouched. The account is yours to close or keep as you choose." Silence. "I've submitted a cosigner removal request for the vehicle loan. The lender will contact you about refinancing in your name. You have the income for it. You always did." More silence. "I've updated my insurance beneficiary. I've canceled the mortgage pre-approval. The property search is over." Isolde's hands were very still on the table. "You planned this," she said. "I prepared," I said. "There's a difference. Planning implies I was building toward a specific outcome. Preparing means I made sure I wasn't exposed if things went the way they appeared to be going." She looked at me for a long time. "When did you do all this?" "Over the past few weeks. While I thought we were still in a holding pattern. While you were figuring things out," I said. "So was I." She sat back. The composed posture she had arrived with was still there, but it had thinned. I could see the calculation behind it shifting, the way you see a position recalibrate when the market moves unexpectedly. "You're not even going to ask if I still have feelings for you," she said. "No," Why? Because it doesn't change the math, I said. Even if you do, even if everything you just said is completely true, I've already answered the question that mattered, which was, is this a relationship I can remain in? The answer is no, and that answer has nothing to do with how much I feel. She pressed her lips together once. Is this about Dominic? It's about the word wait, I said. You used it in October, as if it were a kindness, a gift of time, but waiting was never the right posture for me to take. And I think you knew that. Because waiting left you all the options, and it left me holding still. And somewhere between the fundraiser at Thornfield and a parking structure in November, I stopped believing that stillness was something I owed you. She was quiet for a moment. So that's it. That's it, I said. She stood. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. She put it on in the deliberate way you put a coat on when you're trying not to let your hands shake. The 15,000, she said. You're just leaving it. It's yours, I said. It was always yours. She looked at me once more from the doorway, and it was the kind of look that contains a question, but is too proud to ask it. Then she left. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. The building door downstairs opened and closed. I sat at the kitchen table and finished my tea. The cup was still warm. It was a small thing, but it mattered, that the tea was still warm, that I had been in this conversation for less time than it takes for tea to go cold. I looked at the chair she had been sitting in and thought about the word wait again. It had been the architecture of the past 2 months. Everything had been built on top of it. Her assumption that I was staying still, her freedom to explore what she wanted to explore, her option to return and find things as she had left them. But the architecture of waiting is inherently unstable. It's not a structure you can build on. It's a suspension. And suspensions collapse. I had understood this in October, somewhere under the immediate ache of what she was asking. Not consciously, not fully articulated, but in the part of the mind that keeps running even when the rest of you agrees to pause. I had understood that waiting would cost me something I couldn't get back, and I had chosen, very quietly, not to let that happen. I washed both cups, put them in the drying rack. Then I sat down at my desk and opened the sector analysis I'd been working on for the Red Veil client account, and I worked for an hour and a half until the work was done, and there was nothing left to do but sleep. The days after that conversation were not dramatic. There was no escalation, no mutual friends inserting themselves, no late-night calls from Isolde that I had to decline. There was one text. It received 2 days later. Dominic and I aren't together. I just want you to know that. I read it and didn't respond. Not because I was punishing her with silence. I don't believe in silence as a weapon. But because I didn't know what she expected me to do with the information, and I found I didn't particularly need to find out. Whether or not Dominic and Isolde had continued after the parking structure encounter was genuinely irrelevant to my situation. I had already made every necessary adjustment based on what I had seen and what I had concluded. Her romantic status was no longer in my calculation. What I was now running was a different calculation entirely. The trust was operational. My liquid assets were repositioned. I had roughly $412,000 in investments, structured and titled cleanly, and with a growth trajectory that Gideon and I had reviewed together. Over the previous 18 months, my portfolio had grown at a rate that reflected consistent decision-making and a few early positions in supply chain technology that had performed well ahead of expectation. There was also the matter of Ashvale. I had been a senior portfolio analyst for 7 years. I had generated returns that the firm's partners pointed to in client presentations. 6 months before October, Percival had mentioned, in passing, the way senior people mention things they want you to hear without the formality of an offer, that there was a discussion happening about a new internal equity fund and whether there were internal candidates worth considering for a lead position. I had been deferring that conversation, partly because the timing felt uncertain, but partly because I had been orienting so much of my thinking around the shared life Isolde and I had been building. The apartment, the future, the version of myself that existed inside that future. When the future changed, I recalibrated. In the first week of December, I requested a formal meeting with Percival and the two managing partners of Ashvale, a man named Balthazar, who ran the institutional division, and a woman named Josephine, who had built the firm's client network from scratch over 15 years. The meeting was in the conference room on the 11th floor, which had a view of the city and smelled like the dry, cold air that gets recycled through a building all winter. I brought documentation, a performance analysis of the positions I had managed over 7 years, adjusted for market volatility with a comparative benchmark. But 3 pages, no cover slide, just the numbers. I told them I wanted the lead position on the internal equity fund. Percival looked at the pages. Balthazar looked at Percival. Josephine looked at me. "What's your timeline?" Josephine asked. "I'd like to be operational in the first quarter," I said. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer. I'm flagging that this is the direction I'm moving, and I wanted you to know before I start having conversations externally." The word externally was a precise choice. I was not threatening to leave. I was indicating that I had options and was choosing to present them here first. That is a different kind of leverage, not the leverage of ultimatum, but the leverage of preference. Balthazar said, "We've been slow on this, I'll be honest." "I know," I said. We'll have a formal answer before the end of the month," Josephine said. The meeting was 22 minutes. I went back to my desk and ran the Red Veil analysis. 2 weeks later, I received an offer letter. Lead analyst on the new internal equity fund with a carried interest structure that, if the fund performed at the level my track record suggested, would result in a meaningful share of returns over the 5-year fund cycle. The base salary was higher. The upside was significant. I signed it. I had read it 3 times first. Every clause, every carve-out, every condition. I flagged 2 provisions to Gideon. He confirmed both were standard. I signed. Elena appeared at my desk at 4 o'clock on the day I submitted the signed letter. "Something's different," she said. "I got the fund-led position," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "Congratulations," she said. No exclamation. Just the word with appropriate weight. "Thank you." She went back to her desk. In December, the week before the text from Isolde arrived, I received something in the mail I hadn't expected. A letter from the auto lender confirming that the cosigner removal had been processed. Isolde had refinanced the vehicle loan in her own name. The letter was 2 paragraphs. I read it and put it in a folder in my filing cabinet marked 2024 Financial Records. I was no longer on the hook for $14,000 of someone else's debt. That folder closed. The text from Isolde came the following Tuesday. The one that said, "I think I'm ready to stop waiting too. Can we talk?" You know what happened next. What I haven't told you yet is what happened after she left. The building door closed, and I finished the tea and opened the sector analysis and worked until 11. At 11, I turned off the desk lamp and sat in the dark for a moment before going to bed. I thought about the expression on her face when she said you planned this. It had been intended as an accusation, a reversal. You were the one who was cold and calculated. You were the one who maneuvered, while I was just a person going through something. But it had not landed that way for me. Planning implies a target. I had not been targeting Isolde. I had been protecting myself. The distinction feels obvious once you make it. But most people never make it, because the version of masculinity handed to men in emotional situations is one of two things: either perform devastation or perform indifference. Collapse into it, or act as though it doesn't touch you. Both of those are performances. Neither of them accomplishes anything. What I had done was neither. I had felt the thing. The confusion when she asked me to wait. The particular sting of the parking structure encounter. The slow and quiet anger that settled underneath everything as I confirmed what I already suspected. I had felt all of it precisely, without pretending I hadn't, and then I had converted it into a list. And then I had worked through the list. Not revenge, preparation. Not punishment, protection. In January, 6 weeks after the Thursday conversation, my mother called on a Sunday and asked how I was. Good, I said. Really? She said. Really, I said. Different from before, but good. She asked if I was seeing anyone, which is what mothers ask. Not yet, I said. I'm not in a hurry. She made a sound that expressed both acceptance and totes and reserve, which is what my mother does when she disagrees, but respects your autonomy. The life insurance update came through, she said. You didn't need to do that. I know I didn't need to. I wanted to. She was quiet for a moment. You're more serious than you used to be, she said. I've always been serious. A different kind, she said. Settled, like you've put something down. I thought about that. I have, I said. Or I've stopped carrying something. I'm not sure which. The equity fund launched in the first week of February. It was a closed-end fund. 10 investors, minimum commitment of $250,000 per position, total capital raised of $4.2 million, which was modest by industry standards, but appropriate for a first-cycle fund with an unproven lead and a 3 to 5 year timeline. I had structured the investment mandate around two themes I had been tracking for years: domestic supply chain modernization and hard asset technology in the industrial segment. The thesis was not novel, but the execution was specific, and specific is what makes the difference between a theme and a return. By the end of February, the first two positions were established. Clean entries, favorable pricing. I ran a weekly update to investors, 1 page, no more, showing positioning, thesis evolution, and market context. Elena read the first update and left a note on my desk that said simply, "Clear." It was the highest praise she was capable of giving. In late February, I received a call from Gideon. Something came through my desk you should know about, he said. He told me that a contact of his, a compliance officer at a financial services firm that shared mutual clients with Ashvale, had received an inquiry about me. The inquiry had come through informal channels. Someone had reached out asking whether there were any known issues with my handling of client assets or the management of shared financial accounts. Who asked? I said. The inquiry came through someone at a litigation firm, Gideon said. I was quiet for a moment. Thornfield's network, I said. I can't confirm that, but the implication was clear enough. What did your contact say? That there was nothing to share, which is the truth. Because everything I did was clean. Because everything you did was clean, Gideon agreed. And documented. And legal. Yes, and because you left her $15,000 untouched in a joint account and have written records of every decision you made, with dates. I exhaled slowly. She thought there was a lever, I said. People who feel outmaneuvered often look for one, Gideon said. They find the professional angle because it feels like it has the most reach. It has no reach here. Correct. The matter is closed. I thanked him. After the call, I sat at my desk and thought about Isolde making that inquiry. Not angrily, with a kind of clarity. She had arrived at Thursday's conversation believing she held the more uncertain position. She had been the one who'd stepped away. She had been the one asking for re-entry, and she had walked out of it understanding that I had already restructured the ground beneath us both. And then she had looked for a crack in the structure. There wasn't one. I'd checked. Gideon had checked. The wire transfers were documented. The co-signer removal was submitted before the Thursday conversation. I had the certified mail receipt, dated 11 days prior. The joint account withdrawal was traceable and proportional. The insurance change was standard, legal, and unilateral. The mortgage cancellation was a cancellation of a pre-approval, which carries no contractual obligation whatsoever. She had looked for a crack and found smooth surface. That was the last effort she made. March arrived with warmer air and the particular restlessness of a city that has spent 3 months under gray sky and is ready to move. I ran in the mornings, and the route felt shorter. Was the way routes feel when your mind is occupied rather than watching the distance. At Ashvale, the fund's first monthly report showed a position in the industrial segment performing at 14% above entry, which was not a signal to act on, but was a favorable early indicator. Percival stopped by my desk on a Friday afternoon and said, "Good start." "We'll see," I said, which is the correct answer to a compliment about a position in its first 2 months. You don't celebrate early data points. "Humble," Percival said. "Patient," I said. He smiled and went back to his office. Elena and I had coffee at the place across the street from the Ashvale building on a Thursday in March. She had brought 2 cups to my desk and then said, "Come downstairs. You've been inside too long." We sat at a window table, and the street outside was wet from morning rain, and a delivery truck was parked partly on the curb, making traffic slow around it in that resigned urban way. "You seem different," she said. "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." "What happened?" I told her, the sparse version. Not every detail, not the list and the legal steps and the trust documentation, but the arc, the waiting, the parking structure, the Thursday conversation. She listened the way Elena always listened, without inserting herself, without the running commentary of someone waiting for their turn. When I finished, she said, "You didn't fight for her." "No," I said. "Was that hard?" "It would have been harder to fight for something that was already gone," I said. "Fighting for something that's gone doesn't make it come back. Oh, it just makes you tired." She considered that. "She called the office again," Elena said. 2 weeks ago, same questions, looking for outside meetings, outside consultations." "What did you say?" "Same as before. We don't share employee schedule information." "Thank you," I said. "You don't have to thank me," she said. "I was just doing my job." "You went beyond your job. You noticed and you told me. That's different." She looked out the window at the delivery truck, which had finally pulled away from the curb. "You're a good analyst," she said, which, coming from Elena, was a different kind of statement than it would be from anyone else. Coming from her, it meant, you see things as they are, not as you want them to be. And that quality extends past the spreadsheets. "I try to be," I said. We finished our coffees and went back upstairs. The gallery opening was in April. It was a client event, a private gallery in the Ravenswood district that one of Ashvale's limited partners had been involved in funding. I arrived slightly early and spent 20 minutes with the gallery owner discussing the acquisition strategy for the upcoming collection. I was in the middle of explaining the tax structuring implications of purchasing art through a business entity when I saw Isolde across the room. She was with a man I didn't recognize. Not Dominic. Someone shorter, older, with the particular kind of tan you get from January travel, rather than year-round exposure. She saw me. There is a particular kind of distance between two people who have arrived at a resolved conclusion, not an unresolved one. She and I were now in that kind of distance. Yet she didn't look wounded or composed by effort. She looked like someone who had absorbed the outcome and was continuing. I respected that, in the way you respect an opponent who handles a loss with steadiness. She raised her chin slightly. I raised mine. Neither of us moved toward the other. The gallery owner was still talking. I turned back to him. The tax treatment for art acquired through a business entity, I said, depends significantly on whether the acquisition is for decorative business use or investment. The depreciation schedule differs considerably. He nodded, interested. I spent 20 minutes with a client from the industrial sector who had heard about the fund and had questions about the mandate. I answered them accurately and without excess. At 9:30 I collected my coat and left. As the street outside the gallery was wet again. April had not decided it was done with rain. And the car I'd ordered was at the corner. I walked toward it with my hands in my coat pockets. I did not look back at the gallery windows. Gideon met me for dinner the following week. We went to a restaurant in Caldwell that had been operating for 22 years and had not changed its menu in 8, which is either a statement about confidence or stubbornness, and in this case was both. We talked about the fund. We talked about a refinement to the trust structure that he was recommending in advance of some changes to estate law anticipated for the fall. We talked about a friend of ours from university who had just moved back to the city after a decade in Singapore. At the end of the meal, over coffee, and Gideon said, "How do you feel?" "Fine," I said. "I mean about all of it. The Isolde situation, the end of it." I thought about it. "I feel like I closed a position that I should have closed earlier," I said. "Not with regret about the time. The time was part of the data. You need data to make decisions. But I feel clear." "Clear," he repeated. "Like the balance sheet is accurate now," I said. "For a while it was carrying a liability that wasn't marked as one. It looked like an asset. And when I marked it correctly, everything else balanced properly." Gideon looked at me with the expression he'd had since we were 20 years old, somewhere between amusement and concern, weighted toward the former. "You know, most people don't process grief like a portfolio review," he said. "Thus, most people carry bad positions past the point where they should close them," I said, "because closing feels like losing." "Does this feel like losing?" "No," I said, and I meant it completely. Closing at the right time doesn't feel like losing. It feels like liquidity. He laughed. A real one, low and actual. We split the bill down the middle, which is what we always do, and walked out into the April evening, where the rain had finally stopped, and the pavement was reflecting the streetlights in long, wet strips. I walked home because it wasn't far, and the air had that quality you only get in a city after rain, scrubbed and cold and strangely quiet. I thought about Isolde, not often anymore, and not with pain. What I thought about was the architecture of the word wait, The way it had been deployed like a structure I was supposed to stand inside while she moved freely outside it. I had stood inside it for exactly long enough to understand what the structure was. And then I had walked out. The equity fund's 6-month performance review came in July, and the position returns were strong enough that 2 of the original 10 investors had made discreet inquiries about a second closing. Additional capital added to the fund at its current valuation. Josephine called me into her office and showed me the numbers. "This is good," she said. "It's early," I said. "I know it's early, but it's good." I nodded. "The carried interest structure you negotiated," she said, looking at the document on her desk. "Oh, you knew what you were doing when you asked for it." "I calculated what was likely," I said. "I planned for that scenario." She looked at me over the document. "You're going to be more than a fund lead," she said. Not a question. "Eventually," I said. "Yes." I walked back to my desk. Elena was on a call, her pen moving in small, efficient circles on the notepad beside her keyboard. She caught my eye and raised an eyebrow. I gave her a slight nod, which in the language we had developed meant, "The news is good." She returned to her call. By October, exactly 1 year after Isolde had asked me to wait, the equity fund had returned the following: a first-year annualized return of 18.4% across the active positions, with 1 position in supply chain technology that had outperformed significantly, now and a write-off on a single smaller position that had missed its thesis early and been closed before it could compound downward. The portfolio was leaner and better after the write-off, which is a thing that is true about both portfolios and lives. My total personal net worth, including the fund's carried interest at current valuation, the trust's investment holdings, and the liquid accounts that had been repositioned the previous winter, was substantially different from what it had been the previous October. Not dramatically so. This was not the kind of story where someone becomes a different person in 12 months. But materially so. Accurately so. The balance sheet now reflected what was real. I was 35. My investments were growing in a structure that was legally clean and correctly titled. My professional position at Ashvale was different from what it had been 12 months before. The trust existed. My mother was the contingent trustee. My accounts were mine. And I had stopped waiting. In November, a mutual acquaintance, a woman named Nadia, who had known both Isolde and me through the Thornfield fundraiser circuit, reached out to suggest coffee. We met on a Wednesday morning. After the usual exchange, she said, "I heard from Isolde." "How is she?" I said, not defensively, just the question. "She seems okay," Nadia said. "She mentioned she tried to reach you in the spring." "She did," I said. "We talked in December." "She didn't share details, but she said—" Nadia paused, choosing her words. "She said she understood what she'd done, and she said she thought you'd handled everything fairly." I drank my coffee. "That's generous of her," I said. "I thought so. It seemed like it cost her something to say it." "Most honest things do," I said. We talked about other things. Nadia was getting married in the spring. Her partner was a structural engineer she'd met at a conference, and she seemed genuinely happy in a way that was straightforward and unrehearsed. I told her congratulations and meant it. On the way out, she said, "You seem different from when I last saw you. A year ago at the Blackthorn event." "Different how?" I said. She thought about it. "Like you've stopped waiting for something," she said. I held the door for her. "I have," I said. The winter came again. December again. That particular quality of air, dry and cold and carrying the smell of the city's heating systems working at full capacity. I ran my morning route. While I sat at my desk at Ashvale and made precise decisions about where capital should be allocated and where it shouldn't. I ate lunch at my desk most days, and at the place across the street on Thursdays, when Elena flagged that I'd been inside too long. The legal pad with the original list, the one I'd written in October of the previous year at my kitchen table, was in the top drawer of my filing cabinet. I hadn't looked at it since I'd completed everything on it. But I hadn't thrown it away either. I didn't keep it out of sentiment. I kept it because accurate records are accurate records. Because that list was a document of a decision I had made clearly and executed precisely, and those documents matter. There is a version of this story where I would tell you that I was grateful for what happened, and that the waiting period and the parking structure encounter and the Thursday conversation had made me a better person, or had taught me something I needed to learn, or had opened a door that I wouldn't otherwise have walked through. I don't believe in that version. What I believe is that some structures are not worth preserving. That a suspension, by definition, cannot hold weight indefinitely. That when someone asks you to wait while they figure things out, the more useful question is not, when will you be done? It is, what will I do with the time they've given me? I had done a great deal with that time. On the last Tuesday of December, I received a performance summary from Ashvale's analytics team. The fund had entered its second year in strong shape. The investors were satisfied. 2 conversations were underway about a second fund cycle, larger, with a broader mandate. I read the summary at my desk, made 3 notes in the margin, sent 2 responses to investors. Then I closed the document and looked out the window at the city, which was gray and cold and fully operational, doing what cities do in December, moving and producing and calculating and making the next decision before the current one has fully resolved. I turned back to my screen. Elena appeared at my desk at 4:30 with 2 coffees. She set one down on my side of the desk and kept one. "Last day before the office closes for the holidays," she said. "I know," I said. "Any plans?" "My mother's for 3 days, then back." "Good," she said, the same tone she used for clear. We drank our coffees. Outside, and the city's windows were beginning to light up in the early dark of December, block after block of light coming on at different intervals, irregular and certain. "Good year," Elena said. "Better year," I said. She picked up her coffee and went back to her desk. I looked at the window for another moment. Then I finished my work, put on my coat, and left the building. The street was cold. I didn't wait for the elevator.